Hey guys, Tony Maritato here. So joining me in just a moment is Francisco Maya. Now, Francisco is a physical therapist who made the transition from treating humans to treating dogs, canines, years ago. I remember over 5 years ago starting to follow Francisco's journey. He is the original canine PT in my book, and he's going to come on with me shortly to introduce the idea of how he did what he did, how he's helping other clinicians understand and learn how to start their own business, specialized in canine rehab, and what kind of education and background you need to make that transition. So let me see if I can get Francisco on. All right, Francisco, thanks so much for joining me today. So for the people that are just tuning in, that either have never heard of you, have never heard of Canine Physical Therapy, give us a little background. Before we started recording, I was asking you about your history. Like, tell
Mhm.
me, were you treating humans before you decided to switch to treating canines? And what kind of prompted you to make that switch?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. So I've been a physical therapist now. It's going to be 11 years. Graduated with my DPT back in 2012. Honestly, doing canine rehab wasn't even on my radar. I didn't even know that canine rehab was a thing until I had been a PT already for a couple of years. So what happened is I always liked the sports medicine side of things, and that's where I gravitated towards afterwards. I was working in Pittsburgh. That's where I lived. That's where I went to school. And then my wife was finishing her schooling over there. So I was living in Pittsburgh, working your traditional outpatient clinic a little bit after school. And then one of my former coworkers, she was about to do the first certification course module in canine rehab. And that was the first time I heard about it. So that was sometime around October or so of 2013. So basically about 10 years ago now. And she was telling me about it, and I was just like, oh my, this sounds like fascinating. And I remember getting home, telling my wife about it. My wife got super excited, and then I went online to try to find out whatever information I could, about this field, and could not find much information at all. The only thing I could find it was the two websites for the two places at the point in time that would certify physical therapists to work with canines in this field. Didn't find much else at all, but just talked with my wife and decided, you know what, like this sounds amazing. Let me go through it. And then afterwards, we'll figure it out. Like, what am I going to do with this? And my goal wasn't even necessarily to right away go into canine rehab, was just let me get this certification right now, just because it's a good time in our lives for me to do so. And afterwards, I'll figure it out. Even if I don't work with canines for another 5, 10 years, whatever it may be, at least I'll have that certification done. And that was how it happened. So in 2014, went through the whole training through the Canine Rehab Institute, and then finished that certification back in the spring of 2015. And then have basically been working with canines since that point, and have owned my own business for 6 years now, since fall of 2017, basically.
Wow. And so kind of take me through what's a typical day in the life of a canine PT. Like what kind of stuff are you doing? Do you have a facility? Are you going to the patient's home? How does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of us start mobile if we can, in our states, depending on the legislation, kind of like stuff. Um, I started mobile as well. It was a great way, for, at least within my business, right? So, like I said, I worked for a couple of years at a clinic, veterinary clinic, as one of their therapists. But once I branched out on my own, that's what I mean. I went mobile. It's a great way to start a lower overhead kind of business, really grow your clientele. It's basically like home health, but with canines, to be quite
Yeah.
honest,
Yeah.
minus all your Oasis certifications and reassessments. And I did some home health a little bit, so I know how that all goes. But that's basically what it is. So
Speaking of
I
which,
went,
there's Tucker. He came in to
yeah,
join us.
there you go, bud. But basically started mobile, and then a couple of years into it, started figuring it out, kind of like that I wanted it to grow the business to be more than just me. And then started looking into a premise. So we have had our clinic location in Chicago now, going into 3.5 years now at this
Wow.
point. But starting mobile is a great way to do so if we can.
So tell me a little bit about the education process. Now, it's been a while since you went through it. If I remember correctly, I think there's 3 modules plus a live, like in-person element to it. What was that like when you went through the program?
Yeah, so the framework overall, it hasn't changed a whole lot over the last 10 years since I went through. Of course, the content has been updated and whatnot. There's going to be some like differences a little bit, through the few different programs that physical therapists can go through, but they are basically a mix of some online component that you watch, before you go in for your in-person lectures, where the in-person lecture is going to be a little bit more hands-on. Excuse me. With the Canine Rehab Institute, it is what you said, is like 3 modules. In total, if I remember correctly, nowadays, it might be about 9 days or maybe 8 days of in-person stuff that you go between the 3 modules, plus all the different online component that you go with it. I think the other 2 programs, it's a little bit more online and less in-person. But I'm not as familiar with their program per se. But all 3 programs, at the end, when you're done with your like both online and in-person modules, you have a 40-hour externship to do it, basically. Right. Which we are, the Canine PT here in Chicago, we are one site that takes interns. So we take a handful of interns every year, finishing the certification. But basically, you do like a 40-hour internship. So it's pretty quick, just like a week, basically. But it can be a great way to learn how to take some of that component that you learn in the classroom and apply to the real world a little bit. Just so that way, when you do get your certification, you have some of the real life exposure, basically, and not just, from the classroom perspective. But all the 3 programs have that general kind of like format with the externship at the end. Altogether, it's not just a weekend course, as you can imagine. So it can vary a little bit on the total number of hours depending on the program, but we're talking a good like 150 plus hours, between all the different modules, the in-person stuff, your externship and everything. So it's a commitment. And like I said, it took me back in the day a little bit over a year to go through it. I think with the physical therapist through the years that I talked to, on average, it takes people 6 to 9 months, I would say, to go through it, depending on their schedule, their availability. Some people get it done actually quicker than that. Some people like myself ended up taking a little bit longer, but I would say give or take is about how long it takes for individuals to complete it through it.
Well, I tell you, looking at the programs through my research, I think one of the biggest obstacles was a lot of them are full. Like they're not even taking new applicants until 2024, and there's kind of limits on how many they can take. I believe the program you went through right now, when I was looking at pricing, was around between $8,000 and $9,000 for the entire program. But what I'll do for viewers is I'll go ahead and throw some links to the different programs that are available in the description of this video. So with each state kind of having different guidelines, and from my research, it says, you got to look at what the State Practice Act is for physical therapists, whether it addresses animal physical therapy or not, the State Practice Act for veterinary medicine, and then finding kind of the, what's out there for each state. Where you are in Chicago, what are some of the rules, the guidelines right now for a physical therapist who wants to go this direction?
Yeah, so Illinois is one of the states where, even though the Physical Therapy Practice Act, it still doesn't have a clear language about physical therapists working with animals. The Veterinary Practice Act has very distinct language about non-veterinarians working with animals. So basically here in Illinois, the best way I can describe it is a physical therapist can work with animals much the same way that physical therapists would work with humans prior to direct access. So all we need is a referral from a veterinarian who has established a relationship with that particular patient, with a medical diagnosis to that patient, and then with that we're able to treat dogs in the state of Illinois. But in a more broad kind of answer, you're right. So what I usually tell people to do is look at your PT Practice Act in your states. Unfortunately, still just about a handful of them have anything related to animal physical therapy on it. But luckily, not luckily, but a lot of hard work has gone into behind the scenes legislative stuff and whatnot. More recently, the House of Delegates has included animal physical therapy as part of the new proposed Model Practice Act. So there was an article written by Kirk Peck, former president of the Animal Physical Therapy SIG, that he was the one who helped the House of Delegates with that language and stuff. And he posted an article about 6, maybe 8 months or so ago about that update to the Model Practice Act. So hopefully with time, that means some changes. The other thing is to look at the Veterinary Practice Act. Some states are very distinct in terms of non-veterinarians and what they can and they cannot do in terms of the level of supervision. Also, like I said, here in Illinois, it is indirect supervision as long as we have those criteria met. In other states, it does require direct supervision. So unfortunately, that limits our ability to do like that mobile business model that we talked about before.
Right.
We have to be under the same roof of a veterinarian. But to be quite honest, the majority of the states, it's a big gray area where it doesn't say one thing or the other. And then in those instances, what I tell people is to hire a licensed protection attorney. And that attorney can review that language on what it says on your states, and they're able to give you legal guidance in terms of like, what are you able to do or not on your states with animals as a physical therapist. Because a lot of states, there is a little bit of a misconception in our field that, PTs cannot work with animals because my PT Practice Act doesn't say anything.
Right.
But the fact is, most states, PTs can work with animals. There are only a few states where it's very, very limited for us to work with animals. A prime example I can think of is the state of Texas, especially because there are so many PTs in Texas, right? Such a big state where there is this misconception, even because of the PT Board of Examiners in Texas, that on their website, it says that PTs cannot work with animals. But legally, there's nothing in the Veterinary Practice Act saying that PTs cannot work with animals as long as certain criteria are met. So there is, unfortunately, a lot of misconception. And that's what I always encourage people, that if they're not sure, contact someone who can kind of help them. Usually that can be a physical therapist already doing this in their own states. They should have, a more detailed idea of what it entails, of course. And then if nothing else, hire your own attorney, and then they're able to review that for you.
That's awesome. That's a great idea. I didn't even realize there were attorneys who specialize in that. Let me ask you, so I've seen you put out content related to working with dogs that have arthritic changes, degenerative changes, hip dysplasia. I know through my research, I've seen plenty of articles about PTs working with dogs that have had ACL reconstruction and other surgeries. What are kind of, what's the bread and butter for your practice? What is the main thing that you're working with canines on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. The bread and butter is a combination of the senior arthritic patients. Part of it is because of, like I said, our marketing message is really geared towards that. So anyone who has checked out our website or followed us online and stuff, you see that we do a lot of education towards the pet parents specifically. Some veterinarians too, when we do specific lunch and learns to veterinary clinics about how we help patients with arthritis. But we target a lot of our marketing towards that population, primarily because what I've realized it was just a misconception over time that physical therapy was only for dogs that are recovering from surgery.
Sure.
And then I was like, wait, there's so much we can do for this aging population, and the veterinary field still hadn't caught up to it, basically. So we see a lot of that because of it, but then a lot of orthopedic injuries too, and the most prominent one being ACL tears, or as we're calling dogs, CCL, but it's the same thing as an ACL in humans, just because it is the most common orthopedic injury. So we see a lot of those dogs, sometimes where we can avoid surgery with rehab, or sometimes just rehabbing them after they have surgery.
Right. Now I've got to ask, are you specifically doing any telemedicine, telephysical therapy services for this population? Because I would imagine, I mean, I go back to having Tucker here. Thank goodness he's 3.5. He's super healthy. But if he
Mhm.
had something going on and I didn't have access to a local canine physical therapist, I would be looking to connect with somebody online, somebody who could guide me as the
Mm.
pet owner through what I need to do since I don't have a human around to do it. Are you guys doing any of that?
So because of the legislation, doing through telehealth, it can get very tricky crossing state lines because there is such a
Sure.
difference between, on each state on what we can do with animals. I did some telehealth at the height of COVID in the summer of 2020 for active clients, active patients at that point in time that couldn't make it to the clinic. Um, it was okay. It wasn't my favorite, to be quite honest, but it worked out well because I already knew those patients. I already knew those clients. So it was a way to continue providing care for especially those aging dogs who needed something during that time. But in terms of like consulting with like a new patient, a new client, um, they have to be within the same state that you're at.
Right.
So kind of like very much limit the ability for us to be able to do like a telehealth consult for someone like outside of our state. And that's true for other canine rehab therapists too in
Sure.
different states as well. Um, what it can be done, and I've done sometimes is consult to the physical therapist basically about their case. So what I mean by that is now I'm not giving a consult for their dog in
Right.
particular, but I've only done that with physical therapists who were at least going through the canine rehab certification, so they have a general understanding of it, because it is different than what we do. It is similar, but it's different at the same time. Where I
Yeah.
basically consulted them on like, okay, this is how I would recover a patient post-op an ACL tear, right? And then with their knowledge, they were able to apply that to their own dog in that instance. So I've done more within that framework, because then I wasn't consulting a patient, I wasn't doing physical therapy or rehab. I was basically just working as a consultant to the therapist, the person basically.
I just can't believe how many similarities there are. I remember when we first got Tucker, we got him as a puppy. I was researching, nutrition for dogs. I was researching training and behavior and all these things. And I'm like, these are all exactly the same conversations that I see between humans. Like, what should humans eat for an ideal diet? What should dogs eat for an ideal diet?
Mhm.
You've got this. So with what you're saying, I know therapists who have specializations who can't cross state lines for doing telehealth on humans, but they would coach the therapist in that state, and that therapist is treating the human in front of them. It's funny how there are all these parallels.
Mhm.
So that being said, I noticed that there were some pet insurance plans that
Mhm.
may or may not cover services like physical therapy for dog rehab after an ACL reconstruction. I have
Mhm.
to imagine most of what you do, though, is on a cash basis. Do you do in your business? Do you do any insurance reimbursement? What is that experience like if you do? Or is it all 100% cash out of pocket for what you're doing?
Yeah, great question, because sometimes that's also something that physical therapists, because of what we're used to with the human healthcare world, that it's a little bit different. So there is pet insurance. I highly recommend people to get pet insurance, especially if they're getting a younger dog, a puppy, because of pre-existing conditions. Pet insurance doesn't cover pre-existing conditions. So if you're trying to get a pet insurance policy for an older dog or something like that, then that's something to basically keep in mind, what they will cover and won't cover. But if you get like from the get-go when they're younger, then that's good. The one thing is to do your research on the pet insurance company yourself, very detailed research, because basically it makes it hard for you to years later transition to a different company, because then if something happened to your pets and you transfer your policy to a different company, then basically any condition that your pet had during those years becomes pre-existing with this new company, right? So that's
Right.
a little bit the drawback from it. But we do get pet insurance, not as popular. I would say maybe about 20, 25% of our clients have it. Majority of the people still don't have it, but it doesn't change if they have really, like, to us, it doesn't change much if they have pet insurance or not, because it is 100% cash based.
Okay.
And even the people who have pet insurance, it is a claim-based insurance where we're not the ones dealing directly with insurance. I'm not waiting for insurance to pay me to reimburse, getting co-pays or anything like that. So the clients who do have pet insurance, all we do is give them some extra like paperwork that it's not as complicated, with a more detailed invoice and breakdown of what we did with therapy, and they submit that to their insurance company after they pay us, and then the insurance company, based on whatever policy they have it, then send them a check refunding them from whatever percentage of what they paid us. It's all back to them, basically.
Right.
So
And that's
not dealing with the companies directly.
Yeah, that's very similar to like in human care. When somebody has Aflac, you get the information, you send it to your Aflac, person, and then they send you a reimbursement for that. So with that being said, what are, one of the most common questions that I see is, how much does dog physical therapy cost? I would like to ask you if you could give us any information about salary basis. Is there much of a difference in salary for a working employed physical therapist who's working for either a veterinarian directly or a private practice treating dogs primarily? What are the ranges? I'm sure it changes by geography and it changes by setting, but very broadly, generally speaking, what is a physical therapist earning in that area?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because it is something sometimes that it becomes a little bit of a barrier for physical therapists to invest in the certification, because they don't know what's in the other end.
Yeah.
It'd be scary, right, to not know what's in the other end after putting that much time and money into a certification. The good news is that it has changed vastly over the last decade since I got involved. So when I got into the field of animal rehab, PTs were mostly seen as a glorified technician, basically, and we were compensated along those lines. And I have shared on my podcast, on different medias and stuff, my story where I was paid as a technician when I worked at a veterinary clinic, and I did that because of the passion of me wanting to work with animals, but I had to have a second job doing home health PRN for an agency to be able to make a decent living. And that's how it was for a lot of us back in the day. But it still happens sometimes where veterinary clinics that are hiring PTs don't understand that we have a higher skill set, which requires higher pay. But even with the PTs who I know that work for veterinary clinics more recently, they are getting paid equivalent to what they would be paid as an outpatient physical therapist in their region, in their area, basically. So even the veterinary clinics are starting to recognize that aspect of it, and that's basically what I tell PTs looking for jobs. But even when I consult for veterinary clinics, in terms of like, they asking me, what should I pay a physical therapist and this and that, one of the things I tell them to look at is go to a website where you can get statistics on what is an outpatient physical therapist paid around your area. And I like Glassdoor for that. So, to Glassdoor and having an idea of like, okay, this is how much an outpatient physical therapist is getting paid in this area that I live. And then that's a ballpark of where you should be kind of like looking at, because basically the clinics that we run are outpatient physical therapy clinics. The only difference is that they are for dogs rather than humans.
Right.
And then the model is a cash-based model, which is not much different than an out-of-network cash-based model for humans, where there is more one-on-one time anyways, where it's going to cost per session more than you would at an insurance-based type of clinic, but you're going to have a lower volume of patients, because of that. So usually speaking, that's what I tell them to kind of like look at, and roughly, when they're creating their budgets, if you want, or figuring it out, how much I can afford for a therapist. Usually I tell them, as long as you stay at about a 1-to-3 ratio, about 35%, I say, if 35% of the revenue that a therapist generates pays their salary, then you are in a good position as a business owner, because that's going to leave another 65% for you to pay your administrative staff, for you to pay, all the cost of goods, all the cost of administrative costs, rent if you have a space, and all that kind of stuff. And that's where I tell usually the kind of like the ballpark should kind of like generally be. And then we're able to calculate the therapist, productivity if you want, or, how many patients they need to see based on how much they charge to be able to get to that number.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's basically the ratio we started with, 3 to 1. Somebody wants to earn 100,000 a year. I want them to try and produce 300,000 a year. As inflation has affected rates and expensive tuition goes up, obviously that ratio doesn't work quite as well. But those tools are so important. And talking about that, let's wrap up. This is the most exciting part for me. So I saw that you were launching an accelerator group. Tell us about that. What is that? Because I have to imagine anybody watching this, they have a passion for animals. They love what they do. They love being a therapist. They've been thinking about this. And it's probably like here in my area, we have some in Cincinnati, which is about 40, 50 minutes away from me, some canine therapists, but that's really about it. There are so many areas around the state of Ohio that just aren't served. I would think it's probably easier to think of this as I'm going to go into business for myself as a canine PT, rather than I'm going to, you can't just go to a hospital and get a job as a canine PT. So tell me about your accelerator. Tell me kind of what it involves, what it is, who's the ideal candidate for something like that, and when it starts.
Yeah. Like I said, there's such a need, for more and more professionals to get into this field, no matter where you're at. Even in large cities like Chicago, there's always going to be a need. But even when you go to more like mid, cities like Cincinnati or Dayton or Louisville, Kentucky, places like that, there is a need everywhere for PTs to get involved. But like I said, sometimes what we need to realize is that aspect of it's going to be much harder for you to go and find a job. Sometimes we have to create our own jobs, basically. I've done that, and then little by little, I helped other people do the same. And that's what the Canine PT Academy is about. So my business in Chicago is called the Canine PT. I started in 2017, started to achieve, some success. So what happened was a natural kind of process. I wasn't even looking into doing this, but at one point in 2019, some PTs started reaching out to me because they're like, hey, I got certified, but I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I cannot find a position around my area, or if I do, they're not going to pay me, kind of like something that is a livable wage. So I started helping kind of like some PTs figuring it out how to go about opening their own business. And then that grew into this whole other business, the Canine PT Academy, where that's basically what we do. We help folks into this field figure it out, the business sides of thing, so they can make this their thing. It doesn't have to be a side hustle. It doesn't have to be a passion project. It becomes like their business. It becomes something that they can make really good money from too, where yes, you're working within your passion. Yes, you're working with canines, but as a business owner, you're going to deal with some level of stress that other people might not necessarily want to deal with, but you're also going to get compensated higher for it. And our flagship program is our Business Accelerator program, where it's basically a step-by-step blueprint on how to go about all the way from attracting clients to figure out how much to charge, to how to have a conversation around money with people, how to retain those clients, and ultimately all the operational marketing and sales processes that it takes to build a successful, profitable, and sustainable business in canine rehab. And this is the 5th iteration that we're doing of this program. So we have run it 4 times already, have had already like 50 plus students going through it. Wow. And it's been wonderful to help a lot of these therapists be able to make this work for them. Otherwise, I feel a lot of us would just be kind of like stuck without knowing like how to make this passion
Yeah.
something that it becomes not just a living, but it becomes their thing, right? And some of
Right.
those people, some of those therapists that have worked with me choose to stay small, just kind of like themselves, seeing patients, and wonderful. They can make a good like 6-digit like take home pay, like
Yeah.
even well into 6 digits, like 150, $175,000 on their own after taxes, take home pay, basically just keep it lean, but keep it like a good business. And they're able to make that work for them. And that's what they want. They don't want to deal about growing and staff and or anything like that. And some of them get to that stage, but they figured out, you know what? There is more pets around me that need
Yeah.
help I can handle.
Right.
How I start expanding. So some of them have hired other therapists to work with them. Some of them had open a clinical location so they can have more people coming to them. So it's a matter of figuring out what do they want at that point in time then. And that's basically what the Canine PT Academy and the Business Accelerator, which is our flagship program, are really about.
That's so awesome. I mean, that was the main reason why I wanted to get you on here. Before you tell me and others how to get in contact with you or learn more about that, the question that I know everybody's thinking is it only available to physical therapists? Can occupational therapist or even a non-therapist who wants to build the business and then employ physical therapists, get them certified and make them part of their business? Is there any opportunity for that?
Good question. So the majority of people working in this field are either physical therapists, veterinarians, or veterinary technicians. Traditionally, that has been the people going through it. Even the last 10 years or so, it has been an uptick of physical therapists compared to what it was before. So it's definitely, more and more physical therapists getting into it. But there are some occupational therapists on it too. There are some physical therapy assistants that work on it too. You just have to find, it's the same thing. You have to look into your practice act. You have to look into
Right.
legislation to see what are you legally allowed to do. And then, look at the certification programs and look at which ones accept OTs, which one accept PTAs, to go through the certification program too.
Awesome.
But it is a matter of like, what are you legally allowed to do in your state? And then you can kind of like also get involved into the business side of things. So for example, I know an occupational therapist who focuses more on a company that creates braces and that kind of stuff for dogs,
Wow.
with her background on it. So you don't have to be just limited to, the patient care itself. A good friend of mine, a physical therapist who owns a company that makes some of those canine wheel carts,
Yeah.
so you can get involved into other aspects of it beyond just seeing patients.
I mean, I could talk to you for a whole hour more just on that kind of stuff. My research took me down so many rabbit holes and I see so much opportunity in this, but I want to be respectful of your time. So what is the best way for somebody who watches this and says, I've got an interest, I want to learn more? What's the best way for them to either follow you, reach out to you? Where should they go?
Yeah, so we have our website, canineptacademy.com. And then also our podcast, the Canine PT Academy podcast, it's really focused more on the business sides of things, but it's a lot
Yeah.
about mindset and personal development that comes connected with it. So very helpful even for those people who have a little bit of those not objections, but maybe false beliefs in terms of like, can I do this? Can I not,
Yeah.
can I get into this field kind of like stuff. Social media, we're all over social media, Canine PT Academy as well. Everything is our website. That'll probably be the number one spot to stop by and check it out. You can anyone can always send me a DM on social media directly, or can email me at francisco@thecaninepT.com.
Right.
And then I'll get back to you guys too.
Awesome. Well, what I'll do is I'll take all of that. I'll put it in the description of this video and include it in any show notes that we put out there. Francisco, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us, sharing that information, because I think it's such an underserved market. I think there's so much upside potential and opportunity, especially for all those clinicians that just have years of experience. They're looking for a change. They don't know what to do. They don't want to go to acute care, home health, ortho. They just want something different, but they want to leverage the knowledge that they've accumulated over the past 10, 15, 20 years. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it, Anthony.
All right.